Number 1 Greenbank Terrace in Devon, England had once been a nursing home for the elderly, but had been sold and became a rented accommodation. The first tenants to move into the old house were the Chapman family, which consisted of the mother, Marjorie Chapman, and her 2 sons, Mark and George, who were both in the late 30s. Marjorie Chapman was an elderly widow whose health was rather fragile, and her sons did their best to accommodate her. Their first year in the house went without any problems, until one day Mark was not feeling particularly well and had come home early from work and had taken himself off to bed. In the evening, Mark found he was extremely restless and had trouble sleeping and was in a feverish state and threw off his blankets, even though the room was very cool and the outside windows were frosted over. Eventually, Mark drifted off to sleep, and in the early hours of the morning, he could barely make out the sounds of 2 women talking somewhere in the room. The conversation between the women seemed to last for a long while, and at times he just wished they would be quiet. But because he was in a feverish state, could not bring himself to wake up. It was not until he heard one of the women mention his name that he attempted to rouse himself, but was unable to. He then tried to make out what they were saying, and managed to hear, "He's not well, you know. Keep an eye on him, and see to those blankets, nurse." The very next moment, Mark felt the blankets being pulled over and the edges being tucked in all around him. He could actually feel the mattress being lifted around him as his body rolled. He knew that this was not his mother or brother, so who was talking and who had adjusted his blankets? When Mark awoke the following morning, he was still feeling unwell and had to fight to get out of bed because the blankets were still tight all around him. When Mark thought about what had happened the previous night, he was totally confused, as he was a tall and heavy man, so it would have taken much effort to lift the mattress and tuck him in, yet they appeared to do it with ease. When Mark was seated at the breakfast table, he asked his mother whether she'd come in his bedroom during the night and tucked him in. She laughed at him, asking where he'd got such an absurd notion, and said it had been many years since she'd tucked him into bed. Mark never doubted what his mother had said, and besides, the previous night he had heard 2 women talking in his room, and one of them had called the other one nurse. That night he went to bed still feeling unwell, but was feeling much better than the night before, and was able to drift off to sleep. But in the early hours, he was again awoken by chattering female voices, but then drifted off to sleep without having his blankets adjusted around him. He decided not to bring it up with his mother or brother for fear of being ridiculed. Over the weeks, he forgot about the strange incident, but 2 weeks before Christmas, Mark had the same experience when he woke up and saw an unusual glow in the corner of his bedroom, which he described as pearl grey and apricot in colour. This time he was fully awake and not in any dream state, but his body felt extremely heavy. As he was staring at the translucent glow, a figure appeared to take shape, which slowly became more visible, till Mark was able to make out a thin old man wearing a nightshirt with a nightcap on his head. Instead of being terrified of this weird apparition, he found it quite amusing. The little old man then stood on a stool and was stretching his arms, as if he was lifting something over his head. But the funny apparition turned to horror when he realised the man was attempting to hang himself, and he felt helpless and could not move or say anything. Mark then felt relieved when a woman suddenly appeared through the bedroom door, dressed in a nursing's uniform. She was calm and assertive, stating, "Now then, Mr. Dexter, come along back to bed with you." She then held out her arms to the man and said, "That's it, take my hand." Mark could only watch in both fascination and horror at the performance that was playing out in front of him. At first, it appeared as if the old man was going to ignore her orders, but eventually took her hand and then she led him away. The strange glow then ebbed away, and Mark found himself again in darkness. Had Mark just relived an event that had taken place many years before? The whole drama could not have lasted for more than a few minutes, but now he was wide awake and was unable to get back to sleep, so he went downstairs to make himself a hot drink. He would not sleep again that night, and if this ghostly scenario was to become a regular event, he would have to change bedrooms, or he would never be able to get any sleep. Fortunately for Mark, the next 2 weeks would be quiet and peaceful. However, his next paranormal encounter would not be at night in his bedroom, but in the middle of the day in the kitchen. It was Christmas Eve, and Mark had left work early and returned home to find his mother cooking in the kitchen and was removing some mince pies from the oven. Mark told his mother to have a break while he made them both a cup of tea. As they were talking, his mother said she'd be having a night out where a friend would be coming over to take her out to bingo. His mother had no sooner finished talking when Mark nearly dropped his mug as the nurse suddenly appeared behind his mother. The ghostly apparition was surrounded by a red glow and was shaking her head as if she was warning him about something and then vanished. Mark just stared at his mother, but it was obvious that she had not sensed the nurse's presence as she continued to talk about her night out. Rather than being horrified at the sight of the nurse, Mark was now concerned and saw her appearance as a warning of some sort, and then asked his mother whether she was feeling well. His mother looked at him confused and said, "Yes, I feel well. Why, do I look unwell?" Mark said she looked fine, but thought because it was such a cold night, she should relax in front of the fire instead. She disagreed and said she would be picked up in a warm car and then dropped off in a warm car. That evening, Mark was feeling uneasy and became extremely concerned when it was midnight and his mother had not returned home. At 1 a.m, there was a knock on the door, and Mark's fears were confirmed when he opened the door to find a policeman standing there. He informed Mark that his mother had been involved in a car accident and was in the hospital. Mark was now angry with himself for not heeding the nurse's warning and should have forced his mother to stay at home. His mother was in the hospital for 3 weeks and returned home to make a full recovery. The following year was quiet for Mark, and for many months he was not haunted by the nurse or any other staff or patients until September. One Saturday afternoon, Mark was sitting peacefully watching sports on the television while his mother was asleep on the sofa while his brother George was out with his girlfriend. At 1 p.m, Mark decided to make himself a cup of tea, and as he was at the kitchen bench, looked back to see the nurse standing near the TV wearing a starched uniform. Mark's body just stiffened, wondering what horrific event was now about to happen. Then he heard a loud crash that was so loud that he thought a wall had fallen down. He looked across at his mother, who was still asleep, and the nurse had vanished. He looked around the room, but everything looked normal. Short time later, a policeman knocked on the door, informing Mark and his mother that his brother had been involved in a car accident that afternoon but was only slightly injured. Mark was not surprised and had been prepared for the event, as he had already been warned. His brother stayed overnight in the hospital and returned home the following day. Nevertheless, Mark had had enough and managed to get the family to move to another house, where Mark never saw the nurse again. The whole time he was living at the house, he was the only person ever to see the nurse or any other apparition, and no doubt was unaware that he possessed psychic abilities.